and I'd like to remind you that you can sign into and out of this conference as many times as you would like over the course of the day. And now I am delighted to introduce our speaker for this hour, Jennifer Dunkel. Jennifer is the lead instructor for Developmental English at Ozarks Technical Community College. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in English from Truman State University and a Master of Arts in Writing with a Composition and Rhetoric emphasis from Missouri State University. She has been teaching and researching developmental writing for the past 7 years. Jennifer has incorporated MyWritingLab into her developmental writing classes for the past 4 years. Jennifer is actively involved in the National Association for Developmental Education, NADE, the Midwest Regional Association for Developmental Education, and the Missouri Developmental Education Consortium, professional organizations that provide strong support for teachers of developmental education. And now I'd like to pass the phone over to Jennifer for her presentation. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So first of all, welcome and good morning. Let me make this. Okay. All right. Make sure that you can see my screen. Sarah, can you see my screen okay?
That's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to share with others who are going through course redesign, I think the thing that first came to my mind was all the different ways that we could have made our redesign better if we had only known. So the theme that I kind of went with was how can we redesign the future by looking at some of the lessons that we've learned from our past 5 years here at Ozarks Technical Community College. So first, a little bit about the English department at OTC. Just kind of give you an idea of who we are and maybe see if we're similar to your own institution. But here at OTC, we're in Springfield, Missouri, and we have 24 adjunct instructors who teach 2 different levels of developmental English. Our developmental English is broken up into English 040 and English 050. And down towards the bottom of the screen, you can see how our ACT and Compass scores help divide out these sections. So we have 24 adjunct instructors who teach these courses, usually in the fall. We have 9 full-time instructors, and we have 2 levels of developmental English, again, divided by the ACT and Compass cutoff scores. We are a decentralized program with supplemental resources such as a tutoring and learning center. We have a writing center. We have advising that is specific to developmental students. And over the past 5 years, we've gone through multiple revisions of course objectives. A lot of our course objectives are guided by the Missouri Developmental Education Consortium. We began that in 2007, and we've made several revisions over the past few years. We also are aligning our objectives with the Missouri Department of Higher Education, which is still in process at the state level of guiding what students should expect, what they're coming out of high school and what we should expect from them coming into a college level program, and then of course developmental, bridging that gap. Our textbooks for this particular course, we do use Wordsmith and a Writer's World. And this brings us to what we have redesigned. Over the past about 3 years, we've really started looking at what do we need to do. One of the things that we have implemented college-wide is a Bridge to Success program. This program is geared towards students who test into 2 or more developmental courses. So at OTC, we have developmental English, developmental writing, developmental writing, developmental reading, and developmental math. If students test into 2 or more of those courses, they are encouraged to be a part of the Bridge to Success program. In the Bridge to Success program, students have a dedicated developmental education advisor that they can consult with. We also place them into a Keys to College Success class, and we also have an early alert system for these particular students, so that if a student is struggling in one of the developmental courses, instructors can send an email or early alert to an advisor, and the advisor can contact the student and see if we can offer intervention. In the past 3 years, we've also added more full-time instructors. Since I've started 5 years ago, we have added a new full-time instructor dedicated to developmental English almost every year. We also have included more professional development opportunities, specifically offering a celebration of developmental education in the fall and in the spring, and that is available through our Tutoring and Learning Center, which brings all of the instructors of developmental education together just to share ideas of what they might be experiencing in their classes. Our previous form of assessment over the past few years has been solely the final exam, but in the fall of this year, we are moving toward a three-pronged approach, hopefully to create more of a meaningful determination of students who have successfully completed the developmental sequence. And what that will include is students may pass if they earn 2 of the 3 that are listed a passing score. So they will need to earn a 70% or higher in the coursework as determined by the individual instructor, 70% or higher on the department final exam, and a passing score on the writing proficiency, which will be determined by 2 readers, not the instructor. Excuse me, 2 readers other than the instructor. And then, of course, what brings us to the discussion today, we have integrated several MyWritingLab components. So there are 7 lessons that we've learned in the past few years that I would kind of like to share as a, here's what we did, here's what we wish we would have done. The first one is to get instructor buy-in. Some of these may sound obvious. If you're farther along in your redesign, some of these may sound obvious, but sometimes they're not. They may be obvious later, but at the time they're not as obvious. Okay, so whenever we decided to do MyWritingLab, it was kind of a lackadaisical, you know, if you want to try MyWritingLab, great, here's what's happening. We didn't have a whole lot of, there wasn't a whole lot of conversations that were formal conversations, maybe more just casual conversations, but we didn't really talk about adjunct instructors involved in how their courses might be affected if they do MyWritingLab or if they don't do MyWritingLab. And so over the past couple of years, it's just been kind of, I call it laid-back approach to use MyWritingLab or not. But in the past year, all of a sudden it was, we will now use MyWritingLab, which resulted in panic from adjunct instructors and some full-time instructors, even though full-time instructors have been kind of kept abreast of the information overall. Adjunct instructors, I think, were largely left out of the buy-in, which resulted in panic. And then also, without instructor buy-in, of course, we had a lot of instructors who voiced concern over, you know, how is MyWritingLab going to take over my class? How will I be assessed with MyWritingLab? What does this mean for me as the instructor? Am I going to lose control? So in other words, there was a lot of kind of angry mob mentality at first. So what we would do if we had to do this over again, and especially moving forward, is more of an emphasis on how we got here. Specifically with our course redesign, a lot of how we got here has come from the state level. We also want to show examples of classroom use. This was something that we kind of just talked about, but in hindsight, we should have invited instructors to those classrooms that were currently using MyWritingLab and invite them to see how MyWritingLab can actually be used. So real examples of MyWritingLab use. We did have several open Q&A sessions about MyWritingLab, but they were not required. So going with that laid-back kind of approach, you know, maybe we had 5 out of the 30 or so instructors that we had who would be interested in coming to the Q&A. And of course, as we all know, when something is voluntary, the people who show up are usually not the ones who need the information. It's the people who don't think that it applies to them or don't think that it's valuable. So in hindsight, I think we would have had more open Q&A sessions and more emphasis on their importance. Full-time instructors had the opportunity to do trials and pilots, and there were 2 or 3 of us that took that on over the past several years where we shared our experiences. But as far as adjuncts using the MyWritingLab, kind of trying it out and piloting it, I don't think we really had very many opportunities for them to do so. And then, of course, again, it seems obvious, but something that we need to be very careful of is to make sure to invite all instructors to take part in redesign. Some of the things that I did send out a lot of emails. I did have a few brown bag lunches, a few open Q&A sessions, but again, because it was so voluntary and we didn't know exactly where we would be heading with MyWritingLab, we didn't create a formal environment for instructors to partake in redesign. It was more of an informal environment. So in hindsight, I would make that more formal. And then when instructors are involved and they can see where things have come from and how the assessment is going to take place, of course they can make sure, I think it will result in less panic and mob mentality. Okay, the next one is provide ample technology training. And we certainly had this, again, as an informal. We had MyWritingLab came to our campus, Pearson representatives came to our campus several times over the past 5 years or so. And they would offer training sessions. But again, it was informal. If you want to use MyWritingLab, here's your opportunity to do that. Again, in hindsight, we should have maybe required those trainings, because what ultimately happened is when we started implementing MyWritingLab as a requirement across the board this past fall, the majority of the instructors had not experienced the training. So we should have thought that through perhaps a little bit more. I also would have encouraged you to use the training for instructors to develop their actual shells. That was one of the comments that we got when we did do training, is that it was very generic. So a Pearson rep would come in and give us an overview of how to set up a course, but instructors ultimately went away and still had a lot of questions about how their individual course would work. So what I would recommend is the lesson that we learned is to have instructors already set up on a shell, and that when they come to the technology part of the training, they can actually start changing things in their own shell, adding assignments, hiding assignments, putting things in order, figuring out how they want to do their actual course. And then finally, multiple hands-on training sessions, and I would offer them throughout the semester, we started this in the fall. We should have done this throughout the summer, but instead what ultimately happened is we had one giant training session about a week before classes started, which of course resulted in that panic I explained earlier. So I would offer multiple hands-on training sessions ongoing, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have multiple sessions, because instructors who do come to a session for technology training, they think that everything, they understand it, and I know this was my experience, you understand it when it's happening right there in front of you, but as soon as you leave that training session, 100 questions pop up, and when you're back in your office getting your shell ready, even more questions pop up. So we should have offered more follow-up training sessions on the technology side. And while the technology training side of that is very important, I think the more important part of it is training teachers how to use it instructionally. So for this, I wish we would have, the lesson learned here, I wish we would have recruited instructors who had been using MyWritingLab and tapped into their individual strengths. For example, some instructors really use MyWritingLab to determine, they use the pre-diagnostic and post-diagnostic. I would have loved to have brought in an instructor and just have that personal experience of what they use for the pre- and post-diagnostics. Other instructors are very focused on just looking at individual assignments or time on task, or using the data from MyWritingLab to determine what they're going to do next in their individual courses. And so looking forward, one of the things that we have on the agenda for the next year is finding instructors who really like a certain aspect of MyWritingLab and inviting them to do a presentation for the rest of us on just that particular, the thing that they're really good at in MyWritingLab. Also, I would recommend developing an agreed upon set of best practices that will guide MyWritingLab's use. For example, some instructors without guidance would use MyWritingLab as a replacement of the course, and we didn't want that at all. We have to be a supplement to what we do. So it was very important, again, in hindsight, to have developed a list of best practices. What do OTC instructors, specifically the English department, what do we value of MyWritingLab? Do we want to use it for grammar assessment or mastery learning? How do we want to use it, and when should it be used, which is a question that I'll address a little bit later, but how much class time should be used? And making sure that we have some consistency so that we don't have half of the instructors using MyWritingLab to do in-class work, and then everybody else is doing out-of-class work. So we wanted to kind of create more consistency. And then finally, we are trying to brainstorm additional ways that we can offer incentives to instructors to attend these instructional trainings on MyWritingLab. Like every college across the country taps for money. Budgets continue to be cut, and so we have to brainstorm and be creative about how we can offer incentives, especially for adjuncts who don't, of course, get paid to attend meetings and to do all of the additional work that is required of being an instructor. So some of the things that we have done, our training that we offer at the beginning of each semester in the fall and the spring does offer a small stipend, excuse me, a small stipend to instructors to attend a 6-hour training. They get about $100, I believe, for that, and that comes from our overall developmental education budget. Our individual department does not have that kind of budget to pay instructors for additional training, but we do try to take advantage of the training when it is available, especially when stipends are used. We did have food was a big incentive. Anytime we had a gathering, we tried to offer some kind of food. So small, yes, still costs money, but considerably less than a stipend per instructor. We had a few brown bag lunches, invited instructors to just bring their lunch, sit around a table, and talk about different ways that they would like to see MyWritingLab used. In the future, I'd like to see us do many, many, many more of those, way more than what we have done. And of course, coffee always seems to be a good incentive, at least around here. Have conversations and coffee. So just getting together and in the morning casually. And then finally, I think the biggest incentive is showing instructors the ownership that they can have over MyWritingLab. I think when we look at a program like MyWritingLab, people who are not familiar with it, the first thing that they might see or have a reaction to is this going to take over my classroom? Or is this going to replace me as the instructor? And the more instructors learn about what MyWritingLab can do and how we want to use it, I think that we have a greater overall buy-in, and we want to create that ownership. When we were looking at how we want to use MyWritingLab, in the past 5 years, the first 4 years of that 5 were just, again, that laid back, do whatever you want with MyWritingLab. And we started in the past 2 years encouraging more and more instructors. Past year, year 5, we have required it across the board. Every student will have MyWritingLab access. Every instructor is required to use MyWritingLab. Of how do we MyWritingLab without taking away their freedom to do other things in the classroom, because we certainly didn't want the classroom to be MyWritingLab. We wanted MyWritingLab to be a supplement to what we do. So the first question we wanted to consider is how much in-class time should be dedicated to MyWritingLab? And ultimately, what our school came up with is very, very limited. We encourage instructors to take 1 or 2 days early in the semester to show students how to set up MyWritingLab. how to maybe register, use it, a few key ideas for their own classes. But other than that, students should be using MyWritingLab outside of class time, either during in the computer lab or as homework. We also wanted to address the question of how much should MyWritingLab be worth. When we gave instructors the laid-back approach, use MyWritingLab however you wanted it, we had some instructors who used it 0%. You know, students had MyWritingLab in their classes, but instructors would say, well, you can just use this on your own as extra practice. But it was worth 0% of the course. And then we had other instructors where MyWritingLab was worth 50% of the course. And we felt that that was too much of a difference between courses. We also found that students where instructors had classrooms where MyWritingLab had more, so we wanted to be careful that students were not passing a course just because they were doing their MyWritingLabs. We wanted to make sure that MyWritingLab was a part of the course, but it wasn't the determination of a student passing or not. So we came to an agreement in our department that MyWritingLab should be 10 to 20% of the course grade. We felt that this gave instructors the flexibility of using it, figuring out how much of MyWritingLab they wanted to use. Because to take it seriously, we wanted instructors to take it seriously, but also no more than 20% because reading proficiency, not a series of exercises. And then, of course, what are the minimum requirements for using MyWritingLab? We went on the low side of minimum requirements across the department, which was in each of our courses we assigned one item that no matter what else an instructor decided to do in the class, this was the one item that we wanted to require. So in our lowest level of developmental English, this was the MyWritingLab topic sentence apply section, and in 050 it was the thesis statement apply section. And we specifically chose these because in 040 writing a good topic sentence is one of our course objectives, and in 050 good thesis statements is one of our objectives. So we felt that these particular bodies aligned with the objective, and beyond this, the instructor could choose what else they wanted to use. When we were approaching course redesign and we were thinking about why do we want to use MyWritingLab, what are we hoping MyWritingLab will do for us, and not just MyWritingLab, but what were the problems that we were hoping to solve by redesigning our courses. So it's important to think about what outcomes we hope to achieve from course redesign. Again, we kind of had that laid-back approach of, yeah, let's do something different. We definitely have issues. We have we don't have good retention. We don't have good completion rates. Students are not going through the entire course sequence. How can we improve these things? Just like anybody else across the nation, but we didn't really think carefully about how to tie those things, what we wanted to tie them to. So for example, one of our outcomes is we do want to increase student retention, but will MyWritingLab do that is our question. We don't know. Improve success on individual course objectives. Now, we have identified the MyWritingLab activities that do align with our course objectives. So, for example, a course objective is use transitional and connective devices. So we can pair that up with an activity in MyWritingLab. And if we want to assess that individual course objective, MyWritingLab could possibly help us do that. And then, of course, higher completion rates of course sequence. So when students go through English 04 and 050 and they go into Comp 1, how many of those students are moving on? And then the big question is, how will we assess these outcomes? Do we look at the before and after data? Well, that perhaps is what most people think of before and after, but the question that we came up with is, and we didn't, this probably makes us sound like we weren't really thinking everything through, but I have to say that in the past year we've kind of been frantic about what can we do to fix things, and not, maybe we haven't been making that many precise, controlled decisions, but now we will. So which outcomes can we connect to MyWritingLab? Can we connect student retention just to MyWritingLab? No. It's certainly a part of it. When students feel confident, they're more likely to stay in class. When students have a lot of practice, that of course builds the confidence, and the confidence leads to retention. But of course, that's not the only thing that leads to student retention. So we also wanted to think about what other factors contributed to the outcomes. And this is important for us because we, in our course redesign, we added a whole bunch of things all at once. We didn't do what you're supposed to do, which is to add one thing and then assess to see if that one thing has an impact. We added several things. We've added more full-time instructors. We've added more professional development. We've added we've looked, for example, the Bridge program, having students have a connection to an actual developmental education specialist. So can we say that if our retention goes up, is it because of one thing or the other? I think we have to look at the overall picture. The one thing that we could possibly attribute to MyWritingLab is the individual course objectives. But, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it's hard to say that any one particular thing is linked to MyWritingLab. At the same time, do we want to, how much of MyWritingLab do we want to continue to use or change if we don't know the direct impact? So that's something that we're constantly looking at. How can we assess the direct impact of MyWritingLab on our courses? Okay, so an example of this is some data that I collected 2 years ago. As I looked at the students who are in our lowest developmental courses and the time that they spent on task in MyWritingLab compared to the final grade that they got in the course. So over here we have the final grade, in that the peachy column, the time on task, and then the final grade in the other peachy column. So the final grade, so students who earned a B as their final course grade, I looked to see how much time were they spending on task in MyWritingLab. And as you can see over here, B students had a time on task range anywhere from 4 hours to 29 hours. And then I excluded the 29 hours because that was actually a student who had a significant learning disability. So I took that as my outlier, and then I came up with students who earned a good grade in the course had about 8.5 hours dedicated in MyWritingLab. And then I looked at the C students, and really that wasn't that much different. Students were spending about 8 hours in MyWritingLab. So I was looking at how much time they spent and then what was their overall grade. And now the slide that I don't have is what happens to the students who failed. And what I noticed is the students who failed were spending 2 hours or less in MyWritingLab. And of course that makes sense. If students aren't practicing, and there might be a lot of other factors at play, but if they're not practicing, of course they're not going to get better. But that was pretty significant. However, we want to be careful in our department about looking at all the different reasons why this grade happens. I don't think we can just say students who spend a lot of time in MyWritingLab are going to get a good grade. But it is something that we can perhaps share with students and with other instructors, that we can make some kind of correlation, or at least it can be a part of the overall equation to success. Another thing that I looked at is the difference in the pre-diagnostic and the post-diagnostic with the sentence grammar. I did not look at punctuation mechanics, usage and style, basic grammar. I just wanted to look at sentence grammar, because when I was looking at the sentence grammar diagnostic tests, those were the ones that really spoke to our course objectives. So what I looked at is how much increase did a student have. So at the beginning of the semester, for example, we had the average was a 43% on the sentence grammar, and at the end it was a 65%. So there's significant increase. But again, conversations in our department, we want to be very careful to say, well, why does a student go from 43 at the beginning of the semester to 65. And of course, there are lots of reasons. It's not just MyWritingLab. It is the instructor who is helping students learn the grammar. I always like to say students made these leaps from 43 to 65, or you know, for example, down here from 58 to 82. Students make these leaps, but I was with them when they were making these leaps. I was a part of that equation over the 16 weeks that they had me. We learned grammar in class, and they used MyWritingLab as practice. So we can't necessarily say it's just because of MyWritingLab, but we can say MyWritingLab gives us the data to show us where the leaps have occurred. Okay, another one that we looked at is one thing that we can use MyWritingLab for is to figure out if we're making any improvements on our individual course objectives. So in fall 2010, we had MyWritingLab was not required across the board, but last year was our first year that it was required across the board. So we looked at writing focused topic sentence, objective 8, and this is the one, if you remember, that we used, we asked, whatever an instructor wants to do for MyWritingLab is fine, but please do this one requirement, which is the apply section in MyWritingLab. And so what we noticed is in 2010, we had 43% of our, almost 44% of our students who successfully met that objective on their final exam. And this past fall, we had 50%. So we had a gain of 6.7%. We can't, again, say that it's because of MyWritingLab, but what I like is that we can use that is our one difference. We did not have MyWritingLab as a required component in 2010, but we did in 2011. MyWritingLab was a factor in that increase. I don't think it was the only factor, but I do think it was one part of many factors. The next lesson that we learned is to encourage experiment. Sometimes I think we have a worry that if we do something and it doesn't work, we're going to see that as just as a failure, as instead of, okay, here's what we learned, what can we do from here? And especially with adjunct instructors, it's already, I think adjunct instructors are already nervous about what they're doing in their classes. They might not feel like they can do something new and different. So I think that if we encourage them, you know, try out MyWritingLab, figure out what works for you, but then share it with us and have maybe those low risk experiments. You know, if it's only 10 to 20% of the grade, we're not going to do too much damage, I don't think, if something completely flops. But give instructors that room for using MyWritingLab how they want to beyond the guidelines. So we had that one guideline, two guidelines, 10 to 20% of the course, and then of those, please use at least this assignment. And then we need, and our next step is to provide opportunity for instructors to give those experiences and explain what they did in their classes to those people who are still hesitant or on the fence about using MyWritingLab. And then invite instructors to participate in the new MyWritingLab revisions. For example, the new revisions that we're going to in the fall is we're going to see if we can add more of the MyWritingLab assignments to match up with our objectives. And the next step is to see, okay, they can do it on MyWritingLab. Can they do it in their paper? So we're trying to make those connections between the MyWritingLab practices to the actual writing. And then finally, and this is one that we need to do a better job of. We have a lot of instructors, a lot of adjunct instructors who come to us days before the semester starts. And sometimes these instructors are right out of grad school, never taught before. They've never taught for our particular school, or they've never taught, period. And sometimes we'll get these instructors a day before classes start. And these instructors, of course, are they feel pretty frantic. They feel overwhelmed. They don't know what to expect. And then to throw something at them like MyWritingLab in their first semester can be a very overwhelming experience. So to help instructors ease into MyWritingLab, we recommend to already have a list of ready-to-go assignments for instructors who come in at the last minute, have it already set up for them, and then as they become more comfortable and familiar with MyWritingLab, they can make their own adjustments. And then also to share the training load. For example, here at OTC, as the lead instructor of developmental writing, we have maybe 55 sections in the fall and about 40 sections or so in the spring. And if I have 5 new instructors every semester, that's a lot of work for just one person to do all that training. So it's important to have a mentor for that new instructor other than just the department chair or other than just one person, to have multiple mentors to choose from for using MyWritingLab, and then also a technical support person. So one of the things that Pearson is doing for us at our school is they are providing us a name and contact of when any OTC instructor has a question about MyWritingLab technical issue, it is answered immediately because it goes to one technical support person and it's an immediate response. And so that then helps me because I get a lot of those technical questions where instructors are using something and they're brand new to it and they say, how do I, whatever it is, and it's not really an instructional question, it's a, how do I set up this or how do I access that? It's much more time efficient for me to just give them a very specific name of a technical support person. Okay, so just like with anything, when hindsight is 20/20, so we made a few mistakes in our process of redesign, but we have also noticed a lot of things that work for us, a lot of things that we're going to change. We've documented them, we shared them, and hopefully we are going to continue to learn from them and maybe share our experiences with others. One of the things I wanted to conclude with, if we do have any time, is I want to know, what are your lessons learned? What have you done that was maybe could have been better, or what did you do really well that other people need to know about? I think Sarah was maybe going to take questions.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. That was a very honest and thorough presentation, and I hope that other people will be able to benefit from your lessons learned for sure. I'm just curious, if you think a person who is using MyWritingLab for the first time were to take sort of all these best practices into consideration, how soon do you think they could get up and running, in a comfortable way with the technology? Do you think they could do it in 1 semester, 2 semesters? I mean, I know you've been using MyWritingLab for 5 years now, but.
Are you talking about an individual instructor or a whole department?
Well, I guess I was going to say individual, but if you could answer for both, I would like to know
okay.
what you think.
For an individual instructor, I felt like it took me about, this does not sound reassuring, but I'll explain why it can be. It took me 3 years to get comfortable with MyWritingLab, but that's because I did not have anybody helping me. It was completely by myself, and as I mentioned, that really laid back, do it if you want style of approach. And there was also a lot of resistance in our department about MyWritingLab. So I felt like if it was going to be something that I did, I had to really do it on my own. So I don't think it's going to take every instructor 3 years. I'd say if you had really good support of a mentor who's already been using MyWritingLab, a good technical support person, and maybe a couple of professional development trainings before you get into MyWritingLab, I'd say within a year you're going to feel very comfortable using MyWritingLab. As far as the department goes, if this is a major change for the department, and for us it is, asking instructors, for some of our instructors who have never used a whole lot of technology, this is a major change. So in hindsight, we should have had a very clear plan at least 1 full year ahead of overall implementation. So we were really kind of, do whatever you want, and then bam, now it's required, and then we had that panic. Mm-hmm. So I think if we had been more formal for a year and then required everything, and we'd had our open Q&As, and we had both the instructional side of professional development and the technology side, and we had invited instructors to come into the experienced MyWritingLab user classrooms, I think we would have had a much easier segue into our required MyWritingLab.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say for our attendees, Jennifer is a faculty advisor for MyWritingLab, and we have many faculty advisors for all our MyLabs that can do peer-to-peer mentoring, so more on a teacher-to-teacher basis rather than tech help. So in any case, okay, so let me take a question from our question box. So what prompted, this is from Gina Vallis at UCSB, what prompted your department to make MyWritingLab mandatory in teaching classrooms? And why is it consistently so highly valued in instruction as opposed to a variety of pedagogical approaches?
Well, for us, it was I think just like where everybody else is, you've got how can we improve student success in, and we have 12 course objectives. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can pull up something. I don't know if this will work or not. Oh, okay, maybe not. Okay, so it was improving our course objectives. And we chose MyWritingLab because of all the practice. So practice, 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 practice. And it was practice that students could do outside of our class rather than taking up class time. At least that's our approach, is we did not want instructors to use class time just to do exercises of MyWritingLab. That could be done on students' time. That could be their homework. So we loved just the sheer amount of practice that MyWritingLab offered. We also liked the idea of mastery learning, which is to say that sometimes when we get through to a paper, when we get our paper back from our students, and we've been talking about topic sentences and transitions and specific examples, and then we get that paper and we realize, yeah, okay, so we talked about it in class, we practiced it in class, and it's still not coming through. Some of the MyWritingLabs, if done in a timely fashion before that paper is turned in, some of those things can be caught if you go in and look at how well your students are doing on certain practices. And then you can re-emphasize those things in your classroom, maybe provide additional hands-on writing activities in class to help students master those items before they turn in that paper. We did not go the approach of just using MyWritingLab in our course redesign. We did a lot of different things. So for us, it's just one part. We are a department that believes instructors should have as many tools available to them as possible, and MyWritingLab is one of those tools, but it should not necessarily be the one tool that we use. And one of the things that we talk very openly about in our department and with our Pearson reps is that we look at MyWritingLab as a tool, and the instructor is the craftsman. And when a craftsman builds a beautiful table or armoire, we don't look at that piece of furniture and go, wow, what a great hammer, or wow, what a great chisel. We say, wow, what a great craftsman. It's how the craftsman uses the tool. So I think in the right hands, MyWritingLab can be very successful, very useful. But in the wrong hands, if there aren't clear expectations about what you're wanting to get out of MyWritingLab, I think MyWritingLab can actually be abused in many ways. Just like if you don't know how to use, like my husband doesn't like me doing certain house projects because I don't know how to use the tools. I will bang up the walls and create all sorts of problems. So I think it's important to think about MyWritingLab as it's another tool in our toolbox of teaching.
Thank you. Speaking of adjuncts, this is a question from Ernie Branson at Edison State College in Fort Myers, Florida. He asks, when dealing with adjuncts, did your organization create a master course that could be tweaked for use by adjuncts, or did you let each adjunct develop their own course based on their set of best practices?
Okay, so what we did is we allowed instructors to create their own.
Okay.
We talked about having a master course. But ultimately, we decided we really want to have instructors keep that freedom. So what we said is we gave them just a printout of these are the things that we want you to do, 10 to 20%. How you use it is your choice, and then please make sure you assign at minimum these items: the apply topic sentences for 040 and apply thesis statement for 050. Beyond that, do whatever you want. In the future, I would like to create a master shell for those people who want it. And for us, I think that's going to be the big distinction. Instructors who want to use MyWritingLab can choose to use a master shell as we would suggest, but they can also, as long as they're doing our minimum requirements, they don't have to use that master shell. They can use whatever they want. In our department, it was very important for us to leave as much control as possible with the individual instructor.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great solution. Another question, did you experience pushback with those who felt that integrating technology into the developmental courses was more than the students were capable of? If so, how did you work past that?
Yes, we did have pushback on that. And ultimately, I think what that means is the instructor is not comfortable with it, because the majority of students are comfortable. I have in each, let's see, I have like 120 students every semester, maybe 5 or 10, so I definitely less than 10% will need additional help in my office to get set up on MyWritingLab. But I give, in class, about 45 minutes. I walk all of the students through it. Now, I do want to point out, at our school, all of our developmental English classes are in a computer lab. We do have campuses at our school, though, that do not have computer labs for the developmental English classes, so those instructors have to plan ahead to reserve a computer lab to do that. But at least for my own class, I take 45 minutes, get them set up in a computer lab, get them logged on. Students are surprisingly adept at using and figuring out MyWritingLab. It's the instructors who seem to have the most resistance to the technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see, another question here. Does your school use a learning management system? And if so, how does MyWritingLab connect to that?
We use Blackboard. I have never personally linked MyWritingLab to Blackboard. I know that it's possible in the magic land of Pearson Technical Support. You can do it. I don't know. I know there are instructors at our school, like our online instructors. They somehow have it synced with Blackboard, but I don't know how they do that. But yes, it's possible.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. A question from Susan Grover from BYU, Idaho. She asks, since you talk about experimenting and flexibility, why did you prefer using the ready-made MyWritingLab over developing your own online course?
Oh, I don't know what you mean by ready-made. We don't have a ready-made. We don't, okay, I don't know if I understand the question exactly, but our online classes are still up to the individual instructor. MyWritingLab is just a supplement. Mm-hmm. It definitely does not replace the course in any shape or form. Mm-hmm. Okay. It just is a supplement. It's practice for the students. MyWritingLab is practice. It is not instruction. Okay. I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, I think it does. All right, let me take one more question from Vanessa Michelle in West Palm Beach. She says, I'm wondering if you have any experience trying to use MyWritingLab in classrooms with no computers or only a few computers. Do students use it at home reliably? Is technology in the classroom essential to using MyWritingLab? Does it work well in this context for grammar improvement? And you've sort of already talked about this. You said you don't use it in the classroom. Do students, I mean, do you know if most go to computer labs, or do most use their sort of own computers at home, or?
You know, I don't know. I don't know specifics. Anecdotally, a lot of our students don't have reliable internet access at home, and they don't have the money for laptops and good computers. So anecdotally, I think there are a lot of students who are coming to campus to use our computer labs. But no, we don't do it in class. So anything that they do does have to be completed on their own time But we have a lot of open computer labs around our campus, which is a major part of this, I think. If we don't have the computers available to students, that is an issue because not all students can afford a computer at home. Or we have a lot of students who are still in those areas with dial-up, so it's not practical for them. However, because we have so many open access computer labs on campus, we feel like we have eliminated that, but I can't do it at home. We can say, but you can do it here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I think we'll end our Q&A for right now so we can get set up for the next session. I just want to let everyone know that this session has been recorded and will be available on the Speaking About website in less than 2 weeks. And any questions you had that we didn't get to answer, we'll certainly answer offline for you. And thank you very much, Jennifer. We really appreciate your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.